Good evening. Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. On the program this evening, Nicolas Maduro, the ousted Venezuelan leader, and his wife, Cilia Flores, arrived in a Manhattan federal court today for arraignment on narco-terrorism, drug trafficking and weapons charges 2 days after U.S. Delta Force operators in the daring Operation Absolute Resolve seized them from their fortified Caracas compound in Venezuela. Predicted that Cuba's regime is ready to fall, and he is reiterating demands for Greenland. As international condemnation grows, Latin American nations decry a dangerous precedent, and Maduro faces American justice. The hemisphere, in fact, continues to hold its breath. So the big question is, after Venezuela, who's next? I'm joined now by my colleague Natasha Israni. She's outside that courtroom where Nicolas Maduro is being produced. Give us a sense of what's happening around you.
Well, Vishnu, I can tell you that there are a lot of people gathered here outside the U.S. federal courthouse. The press has been lining up, as you can imagine, from the night before. And if I ask my camera person now to pan, he can show you just the extent of media that's here. And above you see a flag with Trump on it. Basically, we've also seen Venezuelan protesters on both sides who have gathered here, some who are happy that Maduro was taken out and others who have come out in support of him. So there is a lot of eyes, like you said, not just in this hemisphere, but also within New York City and the United States on what happens next with this trial. The trial doesn't actually begin today. It's only a procedural appearance of the deposed president and his wife, but the trial will probably take months or even up to a year, according to authorities. The last time we saw a precedent like this was only in 1990, when Manuel Noriega of Panama, the president then, was brought to the United States on narco-terrorism charges as well. And he argued that he had immunity because he was the head of state. And that is the argument that's also likely to come up with the lawyers on the Venezuelan deposed leader's side. But that argument is going to be, in turn, argued back by federal prosecutors who will say that they don't believe he won the election in 2024 and is therefore not a legal president of Venezuela.
We'll keep coming back to you. Thanks very much for joining us from outside the courthouse in New York. I'm joined now by Ravi Agarwal, Editor-in-Chief of Foreign Policy. Thanks, Ravi, very much for being with us. After Nicolas Maduro and his wife were seized in Caracas, is Trump, in your view, signaling a new era of direct U.S. regime change operations in Latin America, going beyond just Venezuela?
Look, it's hard to say anything with the Trump administration, of course, in terms of coherence when it comes to foreign policy, but we can take him at face value in terms of what he said. He said that potentially Colombia could be next, potentially Mexico could be next. And of course, these are two countries that in some senses have things that hurt America. In Colombia's case, cocaine. In Mexico's case, it is the source of fentanyl, which arrives inside America and is deeply harmful to Americans, as we well know, and Trump cares about that issue. But Vishnu, what is interesting here is we still don't know the clear rationale for why the United States toppled Maduro. First of all, this wasn't regime change because Maduro's deputy is now in power. Second, this wasn't about drugs because Venezuela does not produce fentanyl. It produces cocaine. Most of that does not go to the United States. It could be about the fact that Maduro was an illegitimate leader, that he was corrupt, he was kleptocratic, he was a ruinous leader, and that there are millions of migrants who leave Venezuela's shores and then turn into nuisances in countries around them. It could be all of those reasons, but remember, there are many, many countries around the world that tick off those boxes, and the United States usually isn't in the business of regime change all over the world. So this is more puzzling than it usually is, Vishnu, and there are more questions than answers.
I'm going to bring up a graphic in just a moment about his recent comments directed at Cuba and some of the other countries. So let's have that graphic up on the stage. But let's, as that comes up, let me ask you this. How far do you think Trump will go? Is Cuba next on the list after his comments calling it a failing nation ready to fall?
It could be. Again, brave is the person who makes bold predictions in general and especially about the Trump administration, Vishnu. What we can say is that at least one person in the Trump administration cares a lot about Cuba, and that is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. He has long been a hawk on both Venezuela and Cuba, and it is well known that he would love to see the leader of Cuba toppled. And of course, for your viewers, Cuba is very connected to Venezuela. Cuban intelligence is all over Venezuela. Cuba itself, as an economy, largely survives because of Venezuelan largesse and Venezuelan oil. Cuba is the second largest importer of Venezuelan oil. Now, the ripple effects from what we've seen with Maduro could hurt Cuba, but for now, we just don't know because if Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president, who today we believe may be sworn in as president, if she is more of the same,
Yeah.
if she does exactly what Maduro did, then maybe the ripple effects won't exactly hurt Cuba. So, more questions than answers again.
So, as far as Colombia is concerned, Trump said that it was run by, and I quote, a sick man. Trump on Mexico said something will have to be done about Mexico. On Cuba, Trump said Cuba is ready to fall. And on Greenland, right, different context, he says the US needs Greenland. So let's talk a little bit about Greenland. It's almost ludicrous because Denmark is a close, partner of the United States, part of NATO. There are treaty alliances in place. And yet, Trump reiterating his claim on Greenland. Do you actually think that could be more than rhetoric?
I think it's just rhetoric, but who knows with Trump? You're absolutely right to point out that this is way more ludicrous than anything else we're hearing about in the Western Hemisphere, and that is primarily because of NATO. As you say, Article 5 of NATO clearly says an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. It doesn't quite deal with the possibility of an attack from within, but of course, if the United States tried to attack Greenland, other European countries that are part of NATO would be duty bound to protect Greenland and Denmark. So how that plays out is very murky and uncertain, and there's certainly no precedent for any of that. Personally, I think that this is bombast and rhetoric on Trump's part. He's enjoying being president. He's enjoying the trappings of power. He's enjoying saying and doing dramatic things. I do think, though, that one instinct that has driven this Trump presidency is a genuine sense that they don't want to get embroiled in long-term conflicts abroad.
Yeah.
And Greenland would certainly become a long-term problem. And that's why I don't think they would do it. What we've seen in Venezuela was a one-night operation, a successful operation, by the way, a military coup of sorts, which is very difficult to pull off. And I think Trump might just take that success and sit on it rather than try to do more that would be much more difficult to accomplish. A lot also depends, Vishnu, on what happens in the coming days and weeks in Venezuela. If Trump sees this as a success, then he might try to replicate it elsewhere. If, however, he sees that running Venezuela is a thankless job, that Venezuela actually has no institutions, no state infrastructure worth reviving at this point, and that extracting oil is next to impossible and very expensive. Once he realizes those things, he may see that running a country is not something you would wish upon your worst enemy.
Ravi, with Maduro gone, will this potentially force Russia and China to abandon their investments in Venezuela? Or do you potentially see them even doubling down, given the statements, particularly the strong one that China has issued?
Look, I think it is in their interest to always maintain ties with the Venezuelans. They like having something in America's sort of backdoor, as it were. So strategically, purely on that front, they will try to have ties with all kinds of governments in America's backyard. And of course, remember, with Delcy Rodriguez now in charge and her brother runs the National Assembly, a lot of the old guard is still in play and they have extensive ties with the Chinese. I don't think that's going away anytime soon. I'll also point out Delcy Rodriguez is the petroleum petroleum minister. She still retains that portfolio. The Chinese not only are the biggest purchasers of Venezuelan crude currently, they also own many of the contracts for refining and prospecting in the future. And were the United States or US companies try to get in the way, or try to upend those agreements, the Chinese would certainly try to take some form of action. So, we may see more of a status quo situation in Venezuela than the headlines would imply. This is Maduro gone, but not the regime gone.
Is Trump using the Maduro capture as, I don't know, political theater to rally his base and distract from potential domestic challenges?
Everything is theater for Trump. The theater matters. I think if you look at the Saturday press conference that he had, flanked by his top cabinet members, that was a TV moment for a reality TV president. He cares a lot about the optics. He clearly relished the extensive descriptions of the military operation. He clearly relished his moment in the sun, as it were, starting the new year with a bang. So I think all of that matters a lot to Trump. What was interesting, though, Vishnu, is that it could be that Trump personally doesn't care that much about the fate of Venezuela. And that's why he made these very vague references when he was asked about who's actually going to run Venezuela. He said, well, I haven't decided. It's going to be these guys, as he gestured to the people who were standing behind him. And those were, of course, Marco Rubio, Stephen Miller, Pete Hegseth, the Pentagon secretary. So, and of course, Trump cared more about the oil in his comments on Saturday, which again implies that he's not really heavily invested in what actually happens on the ground in Venezuela. The oil question, of course, Vishnu, is such a red herring because Venezuela only produces 1% of the world's oil. It has the biggest resources, but over the last 20 years, it's completely ruined its infrastructure. It's chased away all of the excellent engineers and people who worked in the oil industry. And it would cost upwards of $100 billion to get all of that up and running again to a suitable degree. With oil prices as low as they are right now, $60 a barrel, who's going to front the money?
Yeah. Look, Ravi, great speaking to you. Thanks very much for being with us. I'm now joined by Ambassador Deepak Bhojwani. He's India's former ambassador to Venezuela. And Andres Silva, political analyst and consultant, joins us from Caracas. Andres, let me come to you first. Who really is in charge in Venezuela right now? And is there going to be an election? Is there going to be a transition? Is America actually in charge?
Thank you. Well, at the moment, I'm going to take Marco Rubio's words over those of President Trump. And I will say the United States is not the one that is going to govern in Venezuela. But what I understood from his comments is that they are going to be monitoring that Venezuela's national interests will now be aligned and not against those of the United States. So at the moment, I've been saying this for months. I believe that the best case scenario was for Delcy Rodriguez to be the one to lead this transition, because there is no possible way of governing the country with an immediate opposition government. This would have been an unsustainable and very short-lived transition. And at the end, what is most important for Venezuelans is for there to be a transition that guarantees stability in the country, stability in the region, and new opportunities for Venezuela in the economic and social sense. So for Delcy Rodriguez, a person that on one side has been for over 20 years with the Venezuelan government, and on the other side, that is an acceptable figure for the United States to be the one leading this transition, then I believe there are golden opportunities here for the country to advance with her in charge.
Ambassador Bhojwani, are you satisfied with New Delhi's statement, which sort of takes note of what's taking place, but has neither accepted what's happening or disagreed?
No, I'm not satisfied, but then I'm not in the government. So I'm not sure if I could have done better had I been in the government, because the fact of the matter is that, whether we like it or not, India is peripheral to these events, and nobody is really listening to us. We've talked about Ukraine in a manner which is perhaps ambivalent or ambiguous even. This is not an era of war. I don't believe it says anything really to either side. We're just trying to articulate a position without really taking a position, and that's the problem I have. What the US has done, again, this is not unprecedented. They did this, they've been doing this for decades, is yet again, tear up what is considered a rules-based international order. We have not taken cognizance of that. We tried to do it after the Iraq War. I believe it was about 10 days after the war was launched in March 2003. Our parliament had to issue a statement condemning or deploring the invasion, but that was that. So what we tend to do is, like the three monkeys, if it's not critical, like in Pakistan or wherever we feel our interests are extremely threatened or biased, what we do is we see no evil, we hear no evil, we speak no evil. And we've made that kind of anodyne statement claiming that we want all diplomatic efforts to succeed, etc., etc. I'm not satisfied.
Andres, could you share with us any new details about how this operation actually took place? Because as military operations go down, this is the most audacious I've ever heard about. I track this very closely. There was obviously an inside hand which was involved in all of this. Is that how the US got through to Maduro? Do we have any details of who that may have been?
Well, at the moment, there are only several theories, but I believe that the consensus among analysts, even though there is no confirmation about who it might have been that was working alongside the United States government from inside the government of Venezuela to make sure that this happened, there had to be an inside job, because it is not normal for any army, even if they are vastly superior in weapons, in strength, and in other aspects than the Venezuelan army, for it to have been so easy to enter the capital of the country, for it to have been so quick to extract the president. And right now, yeah, there are many possibilities that it was someone very close to Nicolas Maduro that perhaps either betrayed him or negotiated a good deal for them to aid in his capture and then be spared by the United States government. But what we do know at this moment is that the remaining members of the Venezuelan government, at least in the eyes of the people, are doing what they can to project a united front. We know that at this moment, the new National Assembly that was elected in May of last year is currently being sworn in. I am sure that as a political statement, they will probably make Nicolas Maduro's son the president of the National Assembly. I don't believe the other factions of the government will allow Delcy Rodriguez to be so powerful that she is the president and her brother is going to repeat as National Assembly president. But we do know that whoever it was that aided in the United States operation to take Nicolas Maduro is now either being sworn in as a congressman, is a minister, or is at this moment part of the new administration.
Do we have any idea, Andres, on casualties on the ground in Venezuela? I've heard everything from 30 to 80.
Yes, the last number that we heard is about 80, with some 30, 32 Cuban casualties inside the country. But there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation inside the country. It was said that Nicolas Maduro's main bodyguard, Juan Escalona, was one of those taken out during the operation, but then he appeared on a national broadcast today close to Delcy Rodriguez. So we know that the numbers for most people, both in the Cuban and Venezuelan governments, and from what the United States has reported, that it is close to 80, that number, but there have been no details on what's the demographic within those 80s, or if those 80s, how many injured are there apart from those 80. We know that there is a lot of cloudy information in the country. It is very normal for these type of regimes to be shady with their information, especially after taking such a massive blow. But what we do know is that at this moment, at least in most parts of the country, there is a sense of having to go back to normal, especially for big industries, so that they can move along and they can start this new transition process.
Ambassador Bhojwani, the only thing predictable about Donald Trump is unpredictability. In that sense, do you believe that we'd see more of the same elsewhere in the world? If not direct military action, then certainly, efforts at purging his political rivals, somehow or the other?
Well, look at it this way. Who are his political rivals currently? Cuba is not considered a rival. Cuba is considered a problem and an isolated problem, really. It's a historic issue. I don't think Americans really give much of a damn about Cuba. Some of them who are living in Cuba and who got relatives on the island would like to be able to visit and send remittances, but I don't think it's that important. The issues that would matter to Trump would be Colombia, which was still a few years ago the chief military and political ally of the US in Latin America. And that has turned with Gustavo Petro. But he hands over next year. He can't seek re-election. And there's every possibility of a right or even centrist president taking over, in which case the priority for the US will be to get Colombia back on side. And of course, you have to consider that a lot of the left-wing regimes, including Boric in Chile, who's also a lame duck now because he's being succeeded by a very right-wing elected president. Lula, on the other hand, is a centrist, but he's kept his cards very close to his chest, although he stood Trump off on the tariff issue. There's Mexico, which is far too complex to judge because President Sheinbaum is playing it very, very carefully. She's been targeted on tariffs. She's been targeted on the cartels, etc. Will Trump go all the way and try and bomb out the cartels? He's already bombed over 30 boats on the Pacific coast and in the Caribbean. And some of those could well be Mexican or at least Colombian smugglers, if there are such, and but without proof. So he's gone that far. How much further he can go is anybody.
Yeah, no, so lots of questions over there. I would really wonder what happens as far as Iran is concerned, given the protests that we see on the ground over there as well. We'll certainly be keeping an eye out, not just on South America and Latin America, but all of the world, certainly West Asia as well. We'll leave it over there. I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. Just for the benefit of our viewers, we're going to be continuing our coverage of this big story with the former president of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, being produced momentarily before a judge in that courtroom in New York. We'll have my colleague Natasha Israni up as we track this story very, very closely. For the moment, this short break.